Welcome, dreamer. Tonight, we drift to a seaside village where lanterns glow with feeling, and forgotten lights begin to return. This is the Lanterns of Liora Bay. There is a place beyond the edges of waking, far past where stars keep their steady watch. It lies nestled in the soft folds of the sky, between midnight and morning, where time slows into a whisper and dreams drift like dandelion seeds through velvet air. There, in the hush of the celestial pastures, the dream shepherd tends his flock. He is not young, nor old, not quite man nor spirit, but something gently in between. He walks with bare feet across clouds that bloom with pale flowers, and he wears a robe the color of dusk, stitched with threads of forgotten lullabies and stitched again where wishes have frayed. His name is Somno, though few know it, and fewer still remember to speak it aloud. Each night, as dreamers fall into slumber, their dreams rise like mist from the earth below, softly colored, shimmering shapes. Some come fluttering like butterflies, others roll like marbles of starlight or drift as bubbles filled with song. The dream shepherd watches over them all. He guides the tender ones gently, helps the wayward return to their dreamers, and protects the fragile ones from vanishing too soon. In his care, the dreams nestle safely in glades of stardust and pools of memory, waiting to be cradled by minds grown still with sleep. But one evening, just as the stars were being polished for the night, Somno noticed a gap in his flock. A dream had gone missing. Not just any dream, a rare one, spun of music and moon silver, fragile and bright as breath on a mirror. It had belonged to someone whose heart had long grown quiet, someone who had not dreamed in many nights. He gazed across the meadows and saw no trace of it. The stars flickered in concern. And the dream shepherd, lantern in hand, stepped beyond the edges of the meadow, to find what had been lost. Somno's lantern was unlike any in the waking world. It glowed with a pale, ever-shifting light, neither fire nor flame, but a kind of remembering. When he held it close, it hummed softly with all the dreams it had known, all the nights it had guided safely through the velvet dark. He walked now with measured steps, each footfall leaving ripples of light that faded behind him. The path before him was unfamiliar, a rarity in the celestial pastures, where all routes were born of dreaming hearts. This one shimmered faintly beneath his feet, made not of cloud or starlight, but of feathers, pale ones, soft as breath, scattered like petals on a pond. Somno paused and bent low, brushing a feather with his fingers. It sang faintly, a note too gentle for the ear, felt more than heard. A note of longing, of something forgotten. He followed the path. It wound through the garden of slumbering bells, where dreams of children nestled like blossoms, gently chiming with giggles and lullabies. It passed beneath the wishing arch, where old hopes drifted in strands of gold thread, waiting to be woven anew. And still the feathered trail led onward, quiet and sure. The shepherd began to notice signs, a melody faint on the wind, the shape of a dream not fully formed, flickering at the edge of sight. It was calling not for rescue, but for remembrance. He reached a place seldom visited by the shepherds. The hollow of the hushed. Here, dreams that had been misplaced long ago rested in stillness. Not abandoned, but waiting. They curled like sleeping fawns beneath moon-kissed trees, barely glowing, their colors muted by time. And there, near the roots of a silvery dream tree, Somno found the missing dream. It was smaller than he remembered, curled tightly into itself like a closed flower. Its light was dim, but unmistakably threaded with moon silver and music. It trembled faintly in his presence. The shepherd knelt and whispered, "Ah, you poor little thing. Who forgot you?" But the dream gave no name. Only a single, flickering note. A call to find its dreamer. Cradling the small, flickering dream in the curve of his palm, Somno turned from the hollow of the hushed and began the slow walk to the thresholds. This place lay at the edge of all dreaming, the boundary between sleep and waking, between silence and story. It was from the thresholds that the shepherds listened each night for the pulses of sleepers below, felt the rhythms of their minds dipping into slumber, and sent the dreams gently down like snowflakes on still air. Somno stood now at its edge, the stars like breath behind him, the earth like a hush below. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with hands, but with thought, with memory, with the patient wisdom of one who has guided thousands of dreams home. He felt the tug of sleepers in distant towns, a painter dreaming of colors she'd never seen, a grandfather remembering his youth in gardens made of light, a child dreaming of speaking with owls and wind. But one heartbeat pulsed differently. Slow. Silent. Hollow. A sleeper who did not dream. Somno focused, listening more closely. There, like a faint echo in a quiet chamber, was the dream's companion, the soul from whom it had once been spun. They were still connected, however faintly. The thread between them was thin and faded, like mist stitched with starlight. The shepherd leaned into that thread. And the dream, nestled in his hand, stirred. It pulsed weakly but with a kind of hope, as if it, too, had found the shape of the heart that once held it. "I have you now," Somno whispered to the dream, "and I will carry you gently." He turned from the stars and descended, softly, silently, into the world of waking sleep, to find the dreamer who had forgotten how to dream. She lived on the edge of the city, in a house where the curtains always remained drawn, and the wind forgot to knock on the windows. Her name was Lynn. She did not speak often anymore, except to herself. She kept a small notebook on her bedside table where she once wrote her dreams each morning, but now its pages remained blank. Her alarm rang each morning, and each day she rose with no memory of where her mind had gone in sleep, because it hadn't gone anywhere. For many months now, her nights had passed like deep, silent lakes, unbroken and gray. And yet, on this particular evening, as the clouds gathered and rain kissed the windows, she felt something different. A warmth just beneath her skin. A strange ache behind her eyes, as though a song half heard was trying to find its way back to her. She did not know that, just beyond the veil of her sleep, the dream shepherd stood watching, his lantern casting soft shadows along her walls. He saw her, this quiet soul, curled beneath heavy blankets, her breath steady but her mind adrift. He placed the fragile dream on her pillow, just beside her brow, and touched the glass of the lantern to her forehead. A pulse. The dream stirred. Dimly, slowly. But it did not sink into her. Not yet. Something was missing. Somno tilted his head. There, in the room, stood a wooden box tucked behind old books. Dust-covered, long untouched. He stepped closer, not with footsteps, but with the grace of a dream, weightless and unseen. Inside the box were scraps of melody, music she had once written, songs she had never sung. A picture of herself in a field of wildflowers, laughing. A notebook filled with stories she never finished. These were her seeds of dreaming. Somno placed the tiny dream atop them. And as she slept, Lynn stirred for the first time in many nights, a single tear sliding down her cheek, not from sorrow, but from the soft ache of something almost remembered. In the world of dreams, time does not tick, it drifts. And as Somno stood watch beside the sleeper, he listened not for hours, but for echoes, for the delicate hush that follows when a long silent mind begins to open once more. Lynn's breath deepened, and the silence around her changed. It was subtle at first, like the stillness before snow. Her fingers curled slightly, and her lips parted, as though forming words in a language remembered only in sleep. Her lantern of dreaming, invisible to the waking world, flickered faintly above her pillow, a single note of light, the shade of blue just before dawn. Somno smiled. The dream, nestled among the mementos in the wooden box, began to stir. Its silvery shimmer wove itself around the old melodies and unfinished stories, drawing warmth from the pieces of Lynn's forgotten self. It grew slowly, like a candle flame returning to a wick. And then, it bloomed. In her dream, Lynn stood on a quiet hill where grass swayed like water. She was barefoot, and the sky above her was filled with slow-moving stars. A soft music came from somewhere, distant but beckoning, a lullaby she had once heard in a cradle of wildflowers. She turned toward the sound. Behind her, the sky shimmered open, and a thread of blue light stretched across the air like a path. She did not know why, but she followed it. Back in the real world, Somno gently gathered the dream once more in his hands. It was no longer fragile. It was growing strong. But the shepherd's work was not finished. He knew that one dream was never quite enough. A heart that had gone long without dreaming needed many colors, many echoes, to remember its full voice. He would have to tend the dream. Nurture it. Stay close. And perhaps, help Lynn find her way to dream again, not just once, but always. Somno walked once more through the vale, carrying the now brightening dream back into the celestial pastures. The skies above him shimmered with quiet approval, and the wind curled gently around his robe, lifting its dust-colored edges like petals caught in a breeze. He returned to a small glade near the river of remembering, where time ran slow and soft, and where shepherds often brought new dreams to grow. He placed the dream, now silver blue with golden edges, into the crook of a crescent-shaped tree, whose branches hummed with lullabies no longer sung. The tree accepted it gladly. And as its roots wrapped tenderly around the dream, blossoms began to appear on its limbs, tiny orbs of light, each one pulsing with possibility. Somno rested there for a time, seated upon a curved stone that sang when the wind passed over it. He drew out a notebook of cloud leaf and inked a symbol for the dreamer, a tiny star within a circle, and beside it, a feather curled into a spiral. A sign that the sleeper had remembered. But even as the garden hushed around him, Somno felt a ripple, a small tug, not of urgency, but of curiosity. The dream was not finished. He closed his book. In the distance, a flock of dreams danced above the hills like fireflies, some wide and wild, others quiet and gentle, all drawn toward the dreamer who had begun to open once more. Their colors swirled with longing: coral pink, ocean green, misty silver, warm ochre. They knew the dreamer was ready. And so, as dusk fell across the dreaming realm once more, the dream shepherd rose with his lantern, ready to guide the next dream gently to its keeper. But this time, he would not carry it alone. For in the glade behind him, the first dream, newborn and whole, rose softly into the air, glowing with joy. It would lead the way. Lin dreamed again the following night. This time, she walked through a vast meadow beneath a lavender sky. Soft petals drifted in the air, falling slowly like ash from unseen blossoms. Her feet made no sound on the grass. The horizon curved gently in every direction, and she felt no fear, no urgency, only peace, and a faint, curious pull towards something just beyond the next hill. As she crested it, she found a lake so still it seemed like glass, rimmed with reeds that hummed softly in the wind. She knelt at the edge and looked into the water. Her reflection blinked back, but not the version of herself she remembered from her mirror. This Lin looked lighter. Younger, perhaps, or simply less burdened. She wore a crown of feathers and lantern light, and her eyes held the color of memory's first breath. Then the reflection shifted, and became a boy she could not name. He smiled, placed a hand on the water, and whispered something that did not reach her ears, but left a warmth in her chest like a familiar lullaby. Behind her, the dream shepherd watched, his lantern aglow. He did not step forward. This part of the journey was hers alone. In his hand, he carried a second dream now, this one stitched from quiet laughter and the scent of books, from the softness of hands in warm earth and the thrill of turning a page to a world unknown. It was Lin's, too, spun from childhood nights when she imagined her own stories and wrote letters to the moon. He would wait. When she was ready, she would remember it. Dreams returned when hearts became hospitable again, when the soil of the soul had been tilled with gentleness and longing. And hers was blooming. Far beyond the lake, nestled between folds of cloud and memory, lay a grove few dreamers ever reached. It was called the Lantern Grove. Each tree in the grove held glowing lights in place of fruit, lanterns of different shapes, textures, and colors. Some dangled like teardrops, others floated just above the branches, humming softly with stories waiting to be told. These were the dreams that had been found and remembered, brought back to bloom by those who had once lost them. Somno entered the grove with quiet steps, the second dream cupped in both hands like a firefly he dared not startle. He walked between the trees slowly, listening. Each lantern whispered as he passed, fragments of song, pieces of dreams once forgotten, a dance on rooftops, a long-lost friend, a treehouse in the sky. He reached a hollow tree whose bark shimmered faintly with music notes. This, he knew, was Lin's tree. It had not held a lantern in many years. Somno pressed the dream into the crook of its limbs, and the tree sighed, a sound like wind through tall grass. The new lantern formed slowly, drawing light from the dream's memory. It was a soft green, threaded with strands of deep violet and pale gold. Its surface shimmered with shifting symbols, books, feathered wings, and a hand stretched out toward the stars. He placed a marker in the soil below, a stone carved with Lin's dreaming sigil. And overhead, the lantern began to glow. Back in the world of sleep, Lin turned beneath her covers, a smile blooming faintly on her lips. She did not wake, not yet. But she would remember something when she did, the scent of feathers, the shape of a book unopened, and the color of light that glowed only in dreams. By the third night, the dreams no longer arrived as strangers to Lin's sleep. They came as soft companions, brushing against her thoughts like silk, unfolding stories she did not know she'd kept. She walked through a garden where nothing had been planted, and yet everything bloomed. There were flowers shaped like laughter, vines woven from kindness, and trees whose fruit shimmered with quiet moments, ones she had forgotten, or perhaps had only wished for in passing. Each step she took revealed more of herself. She remembered dancing in her childhood room with a blanket cape, writing stories by candlelight about wind sprites and wandering foxes. She remembered the scent of her grandmother's coat, the rhythm of fingers tracing raindrops on the window. And in that garden, these moments had grown into color and form, rooted in the soil of her heart. The dream shepherd watched from the garden's edge, his lantern resting at his side now, no longer needed to guide. His work had shifted, no longer a guide, but a witness. Some dreams are not returned, they are revealed. Lin wandered deeper into the garden and came upon a bench beneath a willow tree whose leaves sparkled faintly with starlight. On the bench sat a book. No title. Just a soft blue cover and a silver ribbon. She opened it slowly. Inside were pages she hadn't written, yet every word felt like her own. Scenes of wonder, of tenderness, of longing met with peace. A story told not in plot, but in presence. The kind that held her like an embrace. The story of herself. She did not finish the book. She closed it halfway through, and pressed it to her heart, smiling. Some stories, she realized, are meant to be continued only in waking. When Lin opened her eyes, the morning light had not yet brightened the curtains. Everything was hushed, pre-dawn blue, with the stillness that hovers just before the world remembers it is awake. She lay there, unmoving. Something in her chest pulsed softly. Not with urgency, but with fullness. She touched her brow, half expecting to find a feather, or the warmth of a hand. But there was only her own skin, damp with the faint trace of dreams. She sat up. The wooden box, long forgotten, now lay open on the floor beside her bed, though she had no memory of opening it. Within it, the old notes, the stories, the pictures, all gently arranged. The notebook she had left untouched for months now rested beside it, a pen tucked carefully into its spine. She reached for it slowly, almost reverently. And before she could stop herself, she began to write. Not to capture the dream exactly, she could not remember the full shapes, but to write how it felt, soft, steady, full of color and music. She wrote of walking through sky-colored fields, of finding a book she had never written, of seeing herself laughing beneath a tree. As her pen moved, the window caught the light of the rising sun. Outside, the world was unchanged, and yet, she felt different. She stood and opened the curtains. And on the windowsill, though no one could have placed it there, lay a single downy feather. It shimmered with a blue-green glow, just for a moment, before fading into the morning. High above the waking world, the celestial pastures glowed in their quiet rhythm. The dream meadows stretched far and bright, blooming with starlit petals and drifting puffs of old dreams reborn. In the distance, the river of remembering whispered its ancient song, and the wind wound itself gently through the branches of the lantern grove. Somno stood upon a hill of silver grass, his lantern resting beside him, its light calm now, its work for the night nearly complete. He looked toward the earth below. There, nestled among rooftops and trees, he saw the soft pulse of lanterns being lit within hearts, new dreams rising, old ones returning. Threads of color drifted upward, pale gold, soft plum, watery blue, tender coral. And among them, Lin's thread shone gently, woven now into the great loom that connected all sleeping minds. Each thread was not a rope but a whisper, a vibration of memory, longing, hope. The loom was invisible to waking eyes but known to the shepherds, who tended its knots with careful grace. Somno touched Lin's thread. It was steady now. She would dream again, not every night, perhaps, but when the soul most needed it. Her dreams would carry her gently, speak truths in quiet riddles, and leave her with the hush of starlight behind her eyes each morning. And she would not be alone. For when a soul rediscovers dreaming, it becomes a kind of lantern for others. Light begets light. Memory leads memory home. The dream shepherd stepped back, letting the loom weave on. And somewhere below, a writer stirred at her desk, writing stories with the scent of feathers and stardust clinging to her hands. With the first rays of sun rising on the edge of the dream realm, Somno returned to the small hill where he had once noticed a dream was missing. He sat down among the flowers that bloomed only after midnight, glow-petaled and soft, warm with the hush of unseen lullabies. His robe billowed faintly around him as a breeze passed by, slow and sure, carrying the scent of pages and music and newly found memory. The stars above began to dim, their work done for the moment. Somno placed his lantern beside him, and it flickered down to a soft pulse, matching his breath. His eyes closed, not in sorrow, nor weariness, but in the contentment of a cycle complete. For even shepherds must sleep. In his dreams, Somno walked no longer alone. He walked beside a girl with ink-stained fingers and a soft smile. Together, they passed through meadows of dreams not yet dreamt, listening to the quiet music that filled the space between thoughts. And above them, the stars turned slowly. Back on earth, Lin slept once more. Her curtains stirred in a breeze that had no source. On her bedside table sat her notebook, half filled now with stories, none quite finished, but each shining with light. Outside her window, a nightbird sang. And somewhere far above, in the meadows between midnight and morning, the dream shepherd slept beneath a sky that remembered every dream ever told. And all was well. Close your eyes and drift. Far above the stars, a shepherd watches over dreams, guiding them gently back to where they belong. This is the dream shepherd. Liora Bay was not marked on most maps, and the ones that did show it often forgot to add color. But if someone happened to drift close enough, perhaps lulled by a soft wind or an idle dream, they would find a cove wrapped in cliffs like arms, and a village scattered along its shores like pearls flung gently by the sea. What made Liora Bay special, what gave it its breath and soul, were the lanterns. Each evening, as the sky folded itself into twilight, the people of the village would hang their lanterns outside their windows and doors. But these were not ordinary lanterns. They glowed in colors that shifted with emotion, soft gold for joy, lilac for longing, deep blue for serenity, rose pink for kindness, and countless shades in between. No one ever lit them, they simply responded to the heart of the home. The tradition was older than memory. It was said that long ago, when the first settlers arrived and built their cottages from driftwood and sand-brushed stone, the sea gifted them these glowing orbs in return for their gentleness. No one knew how the lanterns worked. They simply glowed. On the western side of the bay, where the land curved like a smile, lived a quiet girl named Elira. She was not known for speaking much, but everyone remembered her eyes, silver gray, like dawn through mist, and the soft way she hummed as she walked the tide line, gathering bits of sea glass and listening to the waves tell their ancient stories. Elira's lantern, however, had not glowed in many weeks. It hung by her cottage window, still and dim, as though it had lost its color, or forgotten what feelings looked like. No matter how gentle Elira's heart remained, no matter how kindly she treated every bird, shell, and breeze, the lantern stayed quiet. And that, in Liora Bay, was a kind of mystery. The villagers noticed, of course, but no one said much. In Liora Bay, it was considered impolite to ask about someone's lantern. Instead, they showed kindness in quieter ways, leaving warm bread at doorsteps, folding sea-blown letters into glass bottles for neighbors to find, or humming gentle tunes near windows to share their light. But Elira could feel the quiet glances and wonderings, like ripples beneath a calm sea. And though she didn't know why her lantern had gone dim, she whispered to it each night. "I'm still here," she would murmur, placing her fingers lightly on its round glass belly. "And I still feel. Don't forget me." The lantern didn't stir. One fog-wrapped morning, as the tide stretched itself sleepily over the sand, Elira wandered farther than usual. The mist that day was heavy, thick with salt and hush. As she stepped over seaweed lace and pearled shells, she spotted something unusual, a shimmer in the surf. At first, she thought it was a fish, or a trick of light. But when she bent down, there it was, a small, glowing orb, no bigger than a robin's egg, pulsing faintly beneath the water. It was pale blue, the color of dreaming. With careful hands, Elira lifted it from the sea. It trembled slightly in her palm, then nestled into her fingers like something that remembered the shape of being held. A whisper brushed her thoughts, not in words, but in feeling. Familiar and unfamiliar all at once, as though the orb carried the echo of a forgotten lullaby. She wrapped it gently in her shawl and carried it home. And that night, for the first time in many weeks, her lantern gave off the faintest flicker of light, a color not seen before in Liora Bay. A silver blue, like memory waking from sleep. In the days that followed, the sea seemed to watch Liora more closely. Each morning, she walked the shoreline with the same quiet steps, her shawl wrapped about her shoulders and the pale blue orb nestled safely in its folds. The villagers noticed the soft glimmer returning to her cheeks, though none dared to ask what had changed. Lanterns spoke louder than words in Liora Bay, and hers now held the shimmer of something in between, part wonder, part waiting. Liora spent her evenings in the small garden behind her cottage, tending to herbs and sea lavender, while the orb rested in a bowl of salt water under moonlight. It pulsed gently, always the same shade of dream blue, never brighter, never dimmer. It didn't grow or speak or drift away. It simply stayed, as though it was waiting, too. On the third evening, as dusk spilled over the village like ink and milk, a knock came at Alira's door. It was Mira, the lantern keeper. Mira was a woman of soft eyes and softer steps, with long hair braided with threads of copper wire. She rarely left the lantern house except during the renewal days. The fact that she stood now on Alira's porch meant something. "I saw a new light last night," Mira said gently, "and I believe it came from your window." Alira nodded, then opened her palm to reveal the orb. Mira leaned close. The orb did not hide, nor flicker. "Ah," said the lantern keeper, after a long pause. "It's been many years since one of these returned." "One of what?" Alira asked, almost in a whisper. "A sea memory," Mira said. "A gift from the deep places. They come only when something forgotten wishes to be remembered again." Alira felt a flutter inside her chest, like a bird stirring from slumber. And the orb, cradled between them in silence, glowed just a little warmer. Mira stayed long into the evening, sipping warm tea from a cup carved of driftwood, watching the pale orb as it floated serenely in its bowl of seawater. Her voice, when she spoke, was like wind weaving through reeds, soft, lilting, and filled with pauses. "There was once a time," Mira said, "when the lanterns of Liora Bay burned in every color the heart could hold. Some lanterns even shimmered with colors unknown to the waking world, hues of hope unspoken, of love that had never needed words." Alira listened, chin resting on her knees, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. But slowly, Mira continued, as the world turned and tides pulled people away, some lanterns dimmed. Not because their owners were cold-hearted, no, but because parts of their light had wandered off. Drifted into the sea, or into the sky, or deep inside the soul. When that happened, a sea memory might return, if the heart was quiet enough to hear it. Alira looked down at the orb. "So it's part of me?" "Perhaps," Mira said, smiling faintly. "Or perhaps it is part of someone else, someone whose glow you were meant to find." Outside, the wind stirred the hanging lanterns, setting them to a soft chiming dance. The village shimmered in shades of coral and pearl, golden saffron and quiet teal. "Let it stay with you," Mira said as she stood to leave. "It may show you the way back to a light long lost." And when she was gone, Alira carried the orb to her window, placed it beside her lantern, and watched them both flicker softly in unison. That night, her dreams were filled with footsteps in the sand, and laughter that echoed like a forgotten song. The following morning arrived with silver skies and the scent of salt on the breeze. Liora awoke slowly, the dream still soft behind her eyes, a feeling more than a memory. She dressed in a woolen shawl the color of fog and stepped into the waking world with the sea memory orb nestled once more into her palm. It was the day of the driftwood market. Every full moon, the villagers gathered along the shore to trade what couldn't be bought: stories, carved stones, thimbles of perfume, lullabies, wishes written on pressed leaves. No coins changed hands, only tokens of meaning and quiet usefulness. Liora hadn't been in some time. But that morning, something inside nudged her gently forward. The market was alive with murmured voices and slow laughter. Lanterns swayed on tall poles above each woven stall, glowing in hues of gentle exchange: moss green for curiosity, honey gold for welcome, lavender gray for peaceful wonder. She passed a table of hand-dyed silks that fluttered like butterfly wings, a bowl of moonberries that sparkled faintly in the morning light, and a harp made of seashells strung on silver wire. Then, she reached the story trader's tent. The woman inside had eyes like titipools, deep, still, and full of things left unsaid. Her lantern was a deep garnet hue, glowing with memory and bittersweetness. "Would you like to trade?" she asked Liora, her voice soft as wool. Liora opened her palm to show the glowing orb. The story trader's breath caught. "That's not from here." "No," Liora replied, "it found me in the sea." The woman nodded once, then reached into a basket and withdrew a small scroll tied with a ribbon the color of ash. "This story belongs to your light," she said. "Take it when the time feels right." Liora bowed gently in thanks, tucking the scroll near her heart. As she turned to leave, the orb in her hand pulsed once, as though it recognized something in the story she had not yet read. That evening, after the moon rose like a pearl above the bay and the lanterns began to hum their soft glows, Liora sat beneath the great cypress tree behind her cottage. She laid the scroll gently on her lap and unwrapped the ribbon, letting it fall like a sigh to the ground. The parchment was soft, worn smooth by time, and carried the scent of lavender and ink. There were only a few lines on the page, written in slanted hand. There was a boy with laughter in his voice, who gathered rainwater in jars to listen to the sky. He once gave away all his dreams, so that someone else could sleep. Liora read the words aloud, her voice barely a whisper. And as the last syllable slipped into the air, the orb in her hand began to glow brighter, still blue, but now with hints of silver, soft pink, and a touch of amber. A memory stirred, deep and slow. She could see a boy's face, blurred at the edges like a watercolor. His eyes were dark with stars in them. She remembered a hand reaching out, offering her a jar filled with stormlight and sound, when she had been too afraid to sleep in the thunder. But the rest was hidden, quiet still. The orb shimmered softly, resting now on her lap like a small heartbeat. She touched it gently and whispered, "I remember," a little. In the stillness, her lantern flickered to match the orb's glow, silver blue with the softest glint of starlit amber. And somewhere, Far out at sea, a single wave rolled a little closer to shore, as if listening. The following day brought a quiet rain, the kind that stitched threads of silver into the sea and made the cobblestones glisten like polished shells. Liora stayed indoors, her cottage wrapped in the scent of tea and stormlight. Outside, her lantern shimmered with patient hues, calm and changing. She sat by the window, the sea memory orb beside her, and pondered the memory it had given. The boy with laughter in his voice, he felt familiar, yet far away, like a song once learned in childhood and half forgotten. Liora knew where she had to go next. There was a place at the edge of the village, beyond the driftwood fences and salt-streaked stones, called the House of Forgotten Things. It wasn't truly a house, but rather a winding cottage built from shipwreck wood and broken memories, tended by an old woman named Agna. Agna didn't sell or trade. She simply kept things safe, gloves missing their pairs, lullabies with no tune, pieces of names, half-remembered dreams. The rain had softened to mist by the time Liora reached the porch. She knocked once, then stepped inside. The room was filled with quiet clutter, shelves of mismatched shoes, drawers full of keys that opened nothing, and rows of jars with petals, pebbles, and feathers too strange for birds. Agna looked up from a tangle of silver thread. Her face was a map of soft years and kindly silences. "Something looking for itself?" she asked. Liora held up the orb, now glowing with the warmth of a held breath. Agna peered at it, then reached for a small lacquered box on a shelf behind her. Inside was a single, folded paper boat, lined with midnight blue ink. She handed it to Liora without explanation. As their fingers touched, the orb flickered brightly. "There," Agna said, smiling. "That's a beginning." Liora carried the boat carefully home, nestled beside the sea memory orb as though the two belonged together. The paper, though old, was crisp and held a quiet weight, like it had waited a long while to be seen again. When she unfolded it, the ink inside was a swirling script, almost like waves drawn across a sky. "If you find this, I remember you. Meet me where the sea sings without words. Where the wind wears blue." There was no name. But as she read, a sudden breeze brushed past her window, rustling the herbs on the sill and sending a faint chime through the hanging shells above her door. Liora stepped outside. The clouds were beginning to lift, and in their place, a path of light shimmered on the surface of the bay, narrow, quiet, and far-reaching. Her lantern pulsed once, and the orb in her palm grew warm. That night, she followed the wind. Not far, only to the high cliffs that watched over the southern end of the bay, where seabirds gathered in silence and wildflowers grew through cracks in the stone. The sea below was hushed, not roaring, not whispering, but singing, somehow, without sound. There she waited, unsure for what. The orb rested on the ground beside her, glowing in tones now unfamiliar, moss green, gentle rose, and a rich violet that stirred something deep in her chest. Then, from the sea, a soft humming. Not made of voice, but of presence. Not calling, but remembering. Liora closed her eyes, letting the sound fill her like tidewater in a tidal. The wind tugged gently at her hair, curling around her fingers. In her mind, she saw a boy again, sitting on a shore with his feet in the foam, holding a lantern of glass the color of laughter. He had been waiting, too. The next morning came with a hush, no birdsong, no crashing waves, just the soft rhythm of tide and breath. Liora stood by her window, gazing out at the water where the sky melted into sea. Her lantern still shimmered with soft, unusual colors, and the orb glowed steadily beside it, a faithful star in her little cottage. That day, she returned to the cliffs. She carried no basket, no scroll or shawl, only the orb, cupped in both hands like something sacred. As she approached the edge, the wind greeted her once more, playful and shy, ruffling her hair and sighing through the tall grasses. At the cliff's highest point stood something new. A lantern, old, weathered, and untouched by rust, hung from a shepherd's hook planted in the stone. Its glass was clear but tinged with the faintest blue, and it swayed gently, as though listening to an unseen melody. Beneath it, half buried in a patch of wild thyme, lay a small journal bound in sea-worn leather. Liora lifted it tenderly, her fingertips brushing sand from the cover. Inside, the pages were filled with careful writing, sketches of shells, poems about rain, and entries dated many seasons ago. One passage caught her breath. I gave her my dream light once, when the thunder frightened her. She never knew. I don't think I'll ever see her again. But if I could, I'd tell her the light was always hers. I only carried it until she remembered. Tears filled Alira's eyes, quiet and without sorrow. Not all remembering was sad. Some memories returned like an old friend at the door, bringing peace in their silence. She looked to the sea memory orb. It now glowed with a golden warmth threaded through the blue, a color she had never seen before. And the lantern on the cliff, after all its waiting, flickered once, and bloomed with light. The days that followed moved gently, like clouds across a spring sky. Liora returned often to the cliff, sitting beside the lantern as it shone brighter with each visit. It had become a beacon, not for ships or strangers, but for something smaller, more precious, the returning pieces of forgotten warmth. She brought the journal home and read a few pages each night. The boy had once lived in the village, long before Liora remembered herself clearly. He had been quiet too, a collector of moments and seashells, a keeper of tiny joys. His name was never written. Or perhaps, it had faded, as names sometimes do when the soul is called elsewhere. One evening, as Liora watched the moon rise with the orb resting beside her, Mira returned. The lantern keeper smiled as she stepped through the gate, her own lantern glowing a curious shade of dawn gold. "You've remembered more than most," Mira said softly. Liora nodded. "But not everything. Some things don't return all at once," Mira replied. "And some are meant to remain gently blurred, like light under water. What matters is that your glow has returned. Not just for yourself, but for another who once carried it for you." They stood together in silence. Above them, the sky darkened into velvet. The first stars appeared, then more, each one a soft pinprick of ancient fire. Mira placed a small bundle in Alira's hands. Inside was a lantern of her own, new, yet familiar. Its glass was etched with delicate waves, and its frame shimmered with silvery driftwood tones. "This," Mira said, "is for the light you found. Not to replace the old one, but to honor what it gave back to you." Elira lit it not with fire, but by holding the orb inside. It glowed. Not just with memory, but with something between light and sound, between sea and sky, something unnamed and perfect. Night settled gently across Liora Bay, and the village shimmered beneath its cloak of light. From every window, every porch and pathway, the lanterns glowed in soft reply to the stars above. They danced slowly in the wind like petals on water, casting halos on the cobblestones and the sea. Elira's new lantern now hung beside the old, and both were alight, one steady in its quiet silver blue, the other softly shifting through colors unnamed. She no longer carried the sea memory orb in her hand. Instead, it floated near the lantern each night, resting within its glow like a pearl nestled in light. Its colors were different now, deeper and more layered. They changed not with Elira's mood, but with the passing of thought itself, like a mirror of dreams gently unfolding. That evening, she returned to the cliffs one final time. The lantern there still swayed on its crooked hook, glowing brighter now, as though drawing from the same light Elira had rediscovered. The journal, too, remained safe in her satchel, a map of another's quiet soul. As the wind played its silent song and waves glistened in the moonlight, Elira did something she hadn't done since childhood. She sang. It was not a song of words, but of sound and memory, of salt and starlight and all the things she couldn't say aloud. It rose like mist from the sea, drifted into the air, and wrapped itself around the lanterns hanging all along the village edge. One by one, the lanterns responded. Not brighter, not louder, just steadier. More certain. The village glowed like a constellation that had always been waiting to be named. Somewhere below, in the soft cradle of the sea, the dream of a boy drifted toward rest, carried on the wind that wore blue. Seasons passed, as they always do, slowly and with a kind of music too quiet for ears. The sea remained, ever lapping at the shore, and the lanterns of Liora Bay continued their quiet dance through dusk and night. Children were born who did not yet know what their lanterns would become. Old stories were told beside hearths, where colors flickered in the corners of rooms. And Elira's cottage remained full of soft glows and quiet tea, of driftwood shelves and scrolls wrapped in ribbon. She never learned the boy's name. Not in the way names are spoken. But she knew him in the way that mattered, in the rhythm of the waves, the shape of a lantern's light, the echo of a jar filled with rain. The sea memory orb remained on her windowsill, now resting like something fulfilled. It no longer pulsed with urgency, only with peace. And on quiet nights, when the tide was low and the air held the hush of dreamlight, Elira would walk the shoreline with her lantern in hand, her footprints filling slowly with stars. The villagers came to say that her light was different. Not just beautiful, but comforting. It was a light that made people pause, breathe deeper, and feel a quiet ache they couldn't name, but didn't wish to lose. Years later, long after her footsteps had faded, and her cottage had turned to stone and ivy, the lantern she had carried still glowed. It was kept in the lantern house, hung in the high window for all to see. No one remembered the full story. Only that there had once been a girl who spoke to lights, listened to the sea, and carried someone else's dream until it became her own. And in Liora Bay, on clear nights when the lanterns whispered to the stars, it was said that the softest light was always hers. In a quiet valley, the trees remember. Their fruit holds forgotten moments, waiting to be heard again. This is the Orchard of Echoes. There is a place the maps no longer show. It lies between hills that bend like sleeping beasts, beneath skies that forget to thunder, and through forests that fold themselves into silence. Travelers do not find it by looking, only by wandering, or by listening. The valley is called Alarin, though few remember that name. It is a quiet place, shaped not by rivers or wind, but by echoes. Long ago, it is said, someone whispered a wish so true that the world softened around it. Trees began to grow where none had rooted before, bearing fruit not of flesh or rind, but of memory. And ever since, the trees of the valley have whispered back what they have heard, truths, dreams, forgotten names, or the softest moments lost between heartbeats. At the heart of the valley lies the Orchard of Echoes. Each tree is different, some tall and reaching, others bent and gnarled like old thoughts. Their bark shimmers faintly with language long since faded from paper. Their leaves rustle in tones of remembered laughter, old lullabies, and the hush of secrets never told. Few live there. But the orchard has a keeper. Her name is Maelise, and she is neither young nor old, but somewhere in that middle stillness where time curls in on itself. Her home is a cottage grown from the tree's own roots, and her hair is streaked with silver, like moonlight caught in moss. She does not speak often, for the orchard speaks enough. Each morning, Maelise walks the rows with bare feet, her palms grazing the bark, her fingers gathering the soft fruit that drops with dreams. And each night, she listens. Because the orchard never sleeps. And on one particular evening, as twilight folded over the valley like a blanket, the trees whispered something new. A name. A breath. A thread of sorrow. And Maelise, heart stirred by the wind's hush, looked toward the eastern hills. Someone was coming. The one who wandered into Alarin did not mean to arrive. He was a quiet traveler named Thalen, a gentle soul with ink-stained hands and a bag full of notebooks. He walked the world not to reach, but to remember. And lately, he had been forgetting more than he found. His dreams had grown thin. The pages he once filled with poems now lay bare. His thoughts wandered in circles, and he no longer recalled the names of flowers or the shapes of songs. He had heard of the orchard once, in a story so old it felt like a myth, a place where memories hung like fruit, and forgotten things returned in the rustle of leaves. He had not believed it. Until, one morning, he stepped into a mist that did not lift. The hills around him bent like arms, and the silence grew deep enough to hold him. And then, without knowing how, he was standing at the edge of trees that shimmered with soft light, their branches humming in tones just beyond hearing. Maelise was already waiting. She stood among the trees, wrapped in a cloak the color of ash and dawn, her gaze steady and calm. "You've brought silence with you," she said, her voice no louder than the wind. Thalen bowed slightly. And lost things. Melis nodded, as though she'd already heard him say it. She turned without another word and began walking through the orchard. He followed. As they moved, the trees swayed, and their branches dipped, as if recognizing something in him. The fruit hanging from their limbs glowed faintly, some red as old letters, some gold like sunlit laughter, others pale blue, cool as unspoken forgiveness. They reached a tree with bark as smooth as memory, and Melis touched its trunk gently. "This one has something for you," she said. Thalen reached up and plucked a small fruit that pulsed with soft silver light. It was warm in his hand. And as he held it, a whisper curled into his ear, his mother's voice, reading to him beneath the rain, the sound of pages and thunder braided together like lullabies. He closed his eyes. The orchard had begun to speak. Thalen sat beneath the tree long after the silver fruit had whispered its memory. He did not cry. There was no sadness in the recollection, only stillness, like a lake remembering the sky. The sound of his mother's voice, the feel of her hand in his hair, the soft rise and fall of the rain outside the window, it came and went like breath, neither clinging nor fading too fast. Melis sat nearby, her eyes half closed as though listening to something older than sound. "That memory was still warm," she said softly, almost as if to the air. "Some fruits fall cold, forgotten long ago. But this one still lingered near the surface." Thalen turned the fruit over in his palm. It had dimmed now, its glow gone quiet, but it remained warm. He placed it gently beside him on the moss. "I didn't know I'd forgotten it," he said. "That's how the orchard works," Melis replied. "It doesn't return what's missing. Only what's ready." They rose together and walked on. Deeper into the orchard they went, past trees that whispered in languages not spoken for centuries. Some sang with the voices of children long grown, others hummed with the weight of final farewells. Each tree bore fruit shaped by the memory it held, some round as pebbles, others long and curled like question marks. One tree they passed bore no fruit at all. Thalen paused. "This one is silent." Melis nodded. "It waits. Some memories are still forming. Some are too heavy to fall." He placed a hand on the bark. It was cool and smooth, like the pause before a thought. Somewhere within it, he felt a tension, a string unplayed, a name unspoken. And he wondered, what part of himself lay hidden there? That night, Melis offered him a place to sleep in her root-woven cottage. It was a quiet home, its walls grown from branches and its ceiling latticed with blooming vines. Lanterns hung in corners, each one glowing with a different color, echoes captured, she said, from dreams she had once tended. The hearth was small, and the warmth came not from flame, but from the breath of the orchard itself. Thalen lay on a bed of moss and cotton grass, the silver fruit still in his hand. He did not dream, not yet, but he listened. Outside, the trees rustled in waves, like an ocean of memory. Some called gently. Others waited in silence. The orchard had not finished with him. In the morning, Melis gave him a small satchel lined with woven thread. "For the echoes you'll carry," she said. He followed her back into the orchard, and the trees bent their limbs ever so slightly as he passed. He began to feel their presence, not just as trees, but as keepers. Each held something sacred. Not possessions or moments, but the weight of feeling itself. They reached a tree wrapped in ivy, its trunk pale as parchment. Meili stepped back. "This one's for you alone," she said. Thalen placed his hand on the bark. A fruit fell gently at his feet. He picked it up. It was pale green, with tiny flecks of gold. It pulsed like a heartbeat. He brought it to his ear. A piano. Slow notes. Hesitant. Then laughter, a friend, perhaps, or a sibling, clapping hands. A voice urging him forward, telling him not to stop. Then a feeling, joy and fear twined together, the rush of doing something brave. He had played once. As a boy. And then, stopped. He opened his eyes, breath caught on the edge of something tender. The orchard was not giving him only memories. It was giving him permission to return. Days passed in the orchard, though time moved like mist, unbound by clocks or calendars. Thalen walked the winding paths as though in a dream, collecting memories he had not known he'd lost, some light as petals, others heavy as dusk. The satchel at his side grew warm with fruit, each one softly aglow, humming with voices of his past. He no longer asked which trees were his. The orchard guided him gently, and he had learned to listen. One morning, he came to a clearing where no wind stirred. In its center stood a single tree, its bark darker than the others, almost black, but smooth as glass. It bore no fruit. No leaves stirred. Yet the air around it vibrated faintly, like the pause before speech. Meili had not spoken of this tree. Thalen stepped closer. As he did, the orchard grew silent behind him. Even the usual rustle of thoughts and echoes stilled. He laid his palm upon the trunk. And it breathed. Not in the way of lungs or wind, but inwardly, into memory itself. A voice, his own, rose from within the bark. "I can't carry it anymore." Then another voice, soft, feminine, warm. "Then let it rest here." And in that moment, Thalen remembered the tree. He had been here once, not in body, but in thought, in grief. Long ago, after a loss too deep for words, he had closed his eyes and wished for a place to put the weight. Not to forget, but to stop it from hurting. He had found it. He had left part of himself behind. And now, it waited. The bark warmed beneath his fingers. A fruit appeared, not falling, but forming, shaped like a teardrop, golden brown, wrapped in light that pulsed softly with sorrow and love. He held it, weeping quietly, not from pain, but from gratitude. Even grief, when remembered gently, can become light. Meili met him in the quiet evening, beneath a sky turning lavender with stars not yet spoken. He sat on the wooden steps of her root-grown home, the satchel beside him, full now with softly glowing fruit. Each one held a piece of his past, but also a thread of who he was becoming. "They're not just memories," he said softly. "They're moments that made me." Meili nodded, sitting beside him. The orchard never lies. But it doesn't reveal everything. It gives you what you're ready to carry. He looked out at the shadowed trees. "Why me?" he asked. She smiled. The orchard chooses those who are listening, even if they don't know they are. He looked at the fruits. Some glowed softly. Others had dimmed. One pulsed faintly with a rhythm he didn't yet understand. "There are more," he said. "I can feel them." Melis nodded again. The orchard has many layers. Some lie deeper still, under root and breath, where the echoes don't just return, they change. Thalen looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I go there?" Her eyes, filled with starlight and quiet wisdom, held his gaze. "You may," she said. "But know this, the echoes beneath are not yours alone. They are shared, the things we all forget together. The songs of old kindness, the silences of lost wonder, the first names ever spoken to the sky." He felt no fear. Only readiness. Melis stood and placed a small lantern in his hand. Its light was pale and steady, the color of breath caught before tears. "Follow the roots," she said. "And listen. Not just with ears, but with who you are." And as the stars leaned low over the valley, Thalen stepped into the orchard's deeper paths, where echoes were not just memory, but meaning. The ground beneath Thalen's feet grew softer, the moss parting as though in welcome. He followed the narrow trail between two great elder trees, their limbs forming an arch overhead, their bark etched with symbols older than song. The lantern in his hand flickered gently, not with fear, but reverence. He stepped into a hollow, where the air grew cool and still. The sounds of rustling leaves and murmuring fruit faded, replaced by a hum deeper than sound, a feeling in the chest, like standing beneath stars unseen. He was now beneath the orchard. Roots twisted through the earthen walls, glowing faintly with threads of memory. Some shimmered with laughter, others with sorrow. All were connected, forming a great and quiet web beneath the valley. Here, the echoes did not belong to one person, but to everyone who had ever loved, hoped, or let go. He walked slowly, brushing his fingers along the glowing roots. A memory surged, not his own. A child reaching out to comfort another after a scraped knee. Another, an old woman singing to a bird whose wings she had mended. And another, two strangers holding hands for the first time beneath the stars. These were shared things, moments no one remembered specifically, but that lived in every heart. Thalen knelt beside a root that glowed pale blue. He placed his lantern beside it. And it began to pulse. Not faster. Not louder. Just deeper. As if in reply. The path led him to a chamber deep below, where the roots opened into a wide, round hollow lit by lanterns of no flame. They floated gently in the air like fireflies, each one glowing with a different light, and each filled the space with silence, not empty, but sacred. At the center of the chamber stood a tree unlike any above. It had no leaves. No fruit. Only branches made of braided roots, reaching in all directions. And on its trunk, 100 hands had been carved, open palms, pressed gently into the wood. Some large, some small, some worn with age. He stepped closer, drawn by something he could not name. At its base lay a bowl of water, still and shining. Thalen knelt, gazing into it. And the echoes came. He saw his father placing a hand on his shoulder, awkward, uncertain, but filled with love. He saw a friend from childhood, one he had not thought of in years, who once stayed beside him during a storm, both of them curled beneath a blanket fortress. He saw strangers offering warmth to one another without reason. A scarf shared. A door held open. A song hummed on a long walk home. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming softness of it all. "This is the orchard's heart," a voice whispered, not aloud, but from within. "Where the echoes gather, and bloom in silence." He placed his hand against the tree. The bark was cool, smooth, and pulsing gently. And then, it welcomed him. The lantern he had carried lifted on its own, floating upward, joining the others. It glowed a new color, one he did not know the name of. But he understood what it meant. Belonging. Thalen did not know how long he remained in the orchard's heart. Time was different there, not in hours or days, but in pulses, in moments that drifted slowly like pollen through the light. He slept for a while beneath the echo tree, his hand still resting on the smooth bark. And in his sleep, there were no pictures, only warmth, only breath, only the steady knowing that he was held. When he awoke, his satchel was full, not just with fruit now, but with a soft glow that came from within him. He stood and turned toward the path that had brought him there. But something had changed. One of the lanterns that had floated above him in the orchard's heart now drifted down. It was his, formed in silence, born from belonging. Its light pulsed not with memory, but with meaning. He did not take it. It followed. As he walked, the lantern bobbed behind him, just over his shoulder, casting soft shadows along the earthen path. It lit the roots gently, and each glowing thread pulsed in farewell. The orchard was not sending him away. It was sending him forward. When he emerged from the hollow once more into the dappled sunlight of the upper orchard, Melis was waiting beneath a tree whose bark shimmered like sunlight on water. Her expression was calm, but her eyes glistened with quiet pride. "You've gone deep," she said. Thalen nodded. "I didn't know there was so much I hadn't forgotten." She placed her hand over her heart. "Sometimes the remembering is only the first step. The rest is living as though you know." The lantern hovered gently between them, and Melis bowed her head to it. "It will follow you now," she said. "Until you no longer need it. Or until someone else does." Thalen stayed one more night. He wandered the paths of the orchard slowly, saying farewell to the trees that had given him so much. Some leaned toward him as he passed, their leaves brushing his shoulders like old friends bidding goodbye. He revisited the tree of his mother's voice, now quiet but full of peace. He returned to the piano-fruited tree and left a note tucked into its roots, "I may try again." And at last, he stood before the tree of grief, where the golden-brown teardrop fruit had formed. He placed it gently on the moss below, no longer needing to carry it in his satchel. "I'll remember without hurting now," he whispered. The fruit shimmered once, then faded into the soil, its echo planted, its burden lifted. That evening, as dusk brushed the sky with violet and gold, Melis walked him to the orchard's edge. They stood side by side in the hush between worlds, the lantern hovering just above Thalen's shoulder, glowing steady and sure. "Others will come," she said. He nodded. "I hope they do. If they listen, they'll find their way." He turned to her, eyes soft. "How long have you kept this place?" She looked toward the trees, their branches aglow. "Since my first forgetting," she said. "And until my last remembering." They embraced quietly. And Thalen, heart fuller than it had ever been, stepped beyond the orchard's borders, the lantern floating behind him like a second soul. The sky above him stretched wide and familiar, and the path home no longer felt lost. He did not look back. But he heard, just once more, the trees whisper his name in a voice that was entirely his own. The valley of Alarin disappeared behind Thalen like the last lines of a lullaby, soft, half-remembered, and ever singing somewhere just beyond thought. He did not walk quickly. The lantern hovered beside him, gentle and sure, casting a pool of quiet light with each step. Though his body felt no different, something within him had stretched, like a space that had always been there but had finally been opened, like a door no longer afraid to let the breeze pass through. He returned not to a city or a road, but to a village on the edge of nowhere. A place where cottages leaned together like old friends, and smoke curled from chimneys in lazy spirals. He had passed through this place before, unnoticed, unknowing. But now, he paused. In the square was a bench beneath a willow tree. An old man sat there, eyes closed, humming a melody that tugged at the edge of memory. Nearby, two children chased bubbles through the dusk, their laughter rising like bells through the evening. And from the corner cottage, a window glowed. He had never seen it before. But he felt drawn, pulled by something warm and rooted. Inside, a woman sat at a small wooden table, a steaming mug between her hands. She looked up as Thalen passed, and smiled, not with surprise, but recognition. Her eyes shone with the calm of someone who also carried echoes. In the window hung a lantern like his. Thalen nodded. He walked on, the echo-lantern still following, now pulsing not with memory, but invitation. Thalen found a place to live in the village, just a room, nothing grand. But it had a window that faced the rising sun, and a patch of garden where the earth was soft. He planted nothing at first. Only sat in the soil some evenings, his lantern hanging above him like a thought held in silence. But over time, he began to write again. Not stories of dragons or daring, but quiet things, the way the air smelled before rain, the shape of a child's wonder, the sound of pages turning in a library no longer there. And in time, others came. Not many. Just one at first. A traveler with tired eyes and a voice that trembled. "I heard there was a place," they said, "where something lost might return." Thalen nodded, and handed them a lantern. He did not speak of the orchard. He did not need to. For soon, they too began to remember. The orchard had never been a place alone. It was a truth that traveled through people, through kindness, through the soft exchange of names and stories and simple, careful listening. Melis would tend the trees, as long as they bloomed. Phelan would tend the remembering, as long as someone forgot. And in the garden behind his home, a sapling sprouted, its leaves rustling not with wind, but with memory. And when the lantern finally dimmed at his side, it did not vanish. It entered the tree. And from that day on, those who passed through the village sometimes paused in the garden, placed a hand on its bark, and wept, not from sorrow, but from joy they could not name. Because they, too, had heard the orchard's echo. And once heard, it never truly faded.